All right, I'm Todd Gleason. I'm a partner solutions architect with Amazon. Specialize in security and compliance. Before Amazon, I was a chief cloud architect for a secure cloud computing company in Dallas, where I built the first PCI compliant public cloud, as well as HIPAA workloads. So I'm going to talk a little bit about security, governance, and compliance. So I hear a lot of people talking about, is the cloud secure? And often, you know, the thought has changed. It's no longer, is the cloud secure? It's, can I protect my data in the cloud, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what Amazon does to mitigate your security issues. So we have a lot of customers working, using a lot of different workloads in our environment. What that means is that we're handling all kinds of use cases. This infograph here is pretty much just to point out one particular thing. Out of all the customers that are requesting our certifications of compliance around our security and our auditing and our attestations, they're spending more money with Amazon. So that means they're feeling more comfortable with the security and the compliance that we have in our infrastructure, okay? This is from a space agency that you guys may know. I'm not allowed to say who it is, but they moved their workloads over and thought that they were more secure in our environment based on the way that we construct our infrastructure. From Forrester, they said that a lot of customers actually think that they're more secure once they move into the cloud. They get better compliance and governance controls, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So there's a paradigm shift happening. You have a lot of legacy data centers, static environments, right? When you move into the cloud, you have the elastic infrastructure, you have more microservice-based architectures, and the biggest thing is that now you have a central control plane API, which means you can query your entire infrastructure, you can audit it, you can make changes dynamically in real time. It's very difficult to do in a static traditional infrastructure. So we have a lot of really tough customers from the financial services industry, we've got healthcare, we've got government. All of these customers have their own particular security needs, their own compliance needs, regulatory compliance needs, and they push that down onto Amazon. Amazon takes all those requirements and they implement all of them on the infrastructure. So it doesn't matter if you require these or not, you're getting that same type of security posture and compliance requirements that these customers are getting because it's universal across the entire infrastructure. In Amazon, some of you guys may know this, but it's a shared security responsibility model. So everything below the line in the orange, Amazon is going to handle. This is going to be mainly the physical global infrastructure from the pavement all the way up to the hypervisor, okay? When you get above that line, that's the customer's responsibility. Or with the help of a partner like Blue Chip Tech, they can come in and help you guys secure your infrastructure or your data. You're going to use several methods from encryption to security group configurations like Colin was talking about, everything up into the entire application stack. So basically what you get with this is you allow Amazon to take the entire infrastructure aspect of it, security and compliance. You have the customer with a reduced scope of the security posture and compliance. You put that together to meet a desired security posture or some type of regulatory compliance, whether it be HIPAA or PCI and some of these other logos that we have up here. So security of the cloud, this is Amazon's part. Last year we released 516 new either services or feature releases. 40% of those had to do with security, compliance, or governance, or auditing capabilities, okay? So it's almost half. And we're releasing more. This is how our team's constructed internally at Amazon. This is how we have so much agility. We have armies of developers, but they all start within a security team. That is the main construct, okay? Inside of there you have operations, engineering, AppSec, and then compliance. All of these work together within one team, and that's how we roll out our services and our features. Physical data center, you're going to have as good or better that you would expect from somebody like Equinix and all your traditional data center partners, right? These are going to be nondescript facilities. I don't even know where they're at. I can't go there. I have access to logical services. I'm not allowed to go to physical services, so there is a separation of duties, right? Network security, all you business people, all you need to know about is this bottom one right here. AWS reduces your common attack vectors at the infrastructure level. So a lot of these threats within an infrastructure environment are real, And we removed these things from the global infrastructure standpoint. So things like IP spoofing, man in the middle, and packet sniffing, and unauthorized port scanning, we're going to block all of that. With all of our API endpoints, we're going to provide DDoS mitigation capabilities. That doesn't mean DDoS for your EC2 instances and stuff like that, but it means if you're using our API endpoints, those are going to be protected by DDoS. So security in the cloud, this is going to be the customer's responsibility, right? And this is all really clearly defined, all of our documentation. Anytime you talk to anybody from Amazon about security or compliance, they're going to talk about this. We're going to handle everything from a global infrastructure standpoint, a lot of magic going on. That's why we have the little stupid bunny looking guy right there. And then the customer is going to be responsible for everything above that, right? You're just driving around the forklift. The main thing that I see at Amazon, even being a cloud architect for another service provider, is that I was always challenged with dealing with traditional legacy type of security point solutions that you would deploy into the physical infrastructure. And they don't scale. That's the biggest issue because most of them are enterprise type tools. They're not cloud-based tools, right? So when you get into the Amazon environment, you notice that the approach and the tools that are available from the traditional vendors is still somewhat lacking, okay? You think of WAF. Amazon just came out with a WAF. That WAF is horizontally scalable. If you go look at some of the traditional WAF vendors, they were a choke point, right? Still very good solutions, but if you come to the cloud and you want the horizontal scaling, you want to be able to take advantage of that, it gets difficult when you still have a single point of failure or a choke point. This is a funny image to me. It's a lot of times when we think about security and a lot of our customers come into the environment, they're still focused on just the host, right? The virtual machine, the EC2 instance, and they're trying to protect and secure it at that level. Well, that's great, you know. Everything burns down, yeah, you still got your EC2 instance. But we need to change that thinking because there are a lot more capabilities in Amazon that allow you to achieve security, apply governance, and meet regulatory compliance. And here's some of it. So we have a new concept at Amazon called security by design. It's borrowed from the manufacturing industry, which is quality by design, where you embed it into the entire process instead of trying to audit something at the end. And some of these capabilities are going to be identity and access management. You can control who has access to the environment. We've got a key management service, so for customers that want to encrypt their data, and I recommend everybody encrypt their data, you can manage your keys. CloudTrail is going to be a logging system that logs the entire environment. So think about the Amazon environment where you're running your workloads as sort of a fishbowl. Now you have these services that sit outside the fishbowl, and you can actually audit the entire environment versus point solutions that live inside the threat landscape, which is what we usually have with traditional solutions. AWS config, we're going to talk about that. That's going to help you baseline your configurations for your application's environment, right? So you can set up the rules that you want to audit against. You can do remediation against that if you want to do things. Like you have developers that are going and just making configuration changes on security groups and whatnot. You can be alerted on that. You can have things remediated. So it's a really good tool. Amazon Inspector, this is brand new. So this is going to allow you to actually go and run security rules against your environment, PCI security rules, networking best practices, things like that. And Inspector will look at an application construct, whether that's the entire environment inside the VPC, like what Colin was talking about, security groups, firewall rules, inside the EC2 instances themselves. It will evaluate the entire environment and come back and give you findings about that. And I've got some slides on that as well. Cloud HSM, if you have a need for FIPS compliance on your encryption, Cloud HSM is a dedicated key management or key storage solution that is single tenant and dedicated to you. So if you have a FIPS 140 level 2 or 3, you would go with the Cloud HSM. VPC, Colin talked a lot about that. The biggest thing is that it is an isolated section of the Amazon cloud for you. It is Amazon's own software-defined networking. So you do have your private IP addresses. You've got stateful firewalls with the security groups. You've got NACLs, network access control lists. And you can do IPsec VPNs or direct connects into that environment. But it is a private, isolated section of the cloud. Another cool thing about Amazon is that you can inventory the entire environment very quickly. You just hit the dashboard and you can see all the resources and the types of resources that you have in the environment at a very quick glance. It's really difficult to do in a traditional static environment. CloudTrail, this is just an example of the interface. So CloudTrail is going to log every API call that's made with your account, okay? So even if you're not developing and hitting APIs, if you're doing stuff in the management console, that is hitting every API of the service. It's gonna log who, what, when, where, and what the request response was. Config, which we just talked about, will tell you what the environment looked like before the change was made. So you can use config and CloudTrail together to help with your auditing. So encrypting, you're going to put data into the Amazon environment. You have a lot of options from encryption. There's some basic server-side encryption with EBS volumes, which is going to be the block storage. But the biggest service that I like is the key management service, because Amazon didn't have this before and it was really difficult to do encryption, and customers are begging for this. So this is a fully managed key management service where a customer can use a dynamically created key that Amazon can provide, or you can provide your own key and store into this management service. Again, if you need a higher level of security for level 2 and above, you would want to go with the Cloud HSM, which is a SafeNet Luna box, if any of you guys know what that is. So you get into the environment, you configure all this stuff, you're like, Todd, that's great, but how do we, it's elastic, it's dynamic. Marshall's over here telling me that he's got a spaghetti network in his traditional infrastructure, right? So what's to keep you from doing that in Amazon? You go, you set it up perfectly, and everybody starts messing with the environment, and then it becomes loose and crazy. Well, you can do a lot of governance really well in Amazon just because of the capabilities we have. So these are some of the questions that people ask me whenever we're talking about governance. In the traditional world, everything's very slow, it's not automated, it's painful. When you get into the Amazon environment, you can do software-enforced processes. You have alarming and triggering. It's more dynamic. It's more real-time. It's more programmable. So config. What's cool about config is that you can turn it on and it will define all the relationships between all the Amazon resources that you have in your environment. From an EC2 instance, it's related to a security group. It's related to an EBS volume. It's related to a subnet, to a route table, you name it. It will tell you the relationship between those resources in the environment. So this is how at a very quick glance you can go and identify and map out the entire environment for auditors. This is a new feature that we just launched this year, and it's part of the config platform, and it's called rules. So we had a lot of customers that liked config, but they said, hey, I want to be able to set up rules and baseline my entire environment, and I want to be alerted when anything changes, right? You got those nasty developers that are always in there making changes and open up security groups and stuff, right? So config rules allows you to set up these baselines. It allows you to be alerted when things happen, and you can also do automatic remediation if you want it to go back. So it's going to give you continuous monitoring, it gives you shared compliance across your organization, and it simplifies the management of all your configuration changes in the Amazon environment. Inspector is really a security assessment tool. So we need to think about it as an application construct when you're defining this in Inspector. Inspector is going to ask you, what is your application? What does it consist of? It's going to consist of components in a VPC. It's going to consist of EC2 resources. Maybe you're leveraging some other abstracted services that Amazon fully manages. You can put all of those into this defined application construct, and you can have Inspector continuously evaluate it. It'll continuously evaluate that environment against whatever rule set that you tell it to evaluate it against, and it will come back and tell you all the findings of anything that may be wrong, or maybe it comes back great, and you just hand that off to your auditor and say, look, we need to be PCI. I ran a PCI rule set against it, and it came back and everything's good. Here's your report. So it's going to give you scanning and activity monitoring. There's a group of built-in rules. I'll show you that here in a second. And then it gives you the findings. And it'll actually give you recommendations in the report as well on things that you need to do. Correct it. So it'll show you CVEs. All the technical people know what a CVE is. I'm not going to bore the business people with that. Network security best practices, PCI. I think we're coming out with 3.1 here pretty soon. It'll give you AppSec best practices, operating system best practices. You can select all these rule sets into one type of assessment and have it evaluate your entire environment. I think the biggest value that we see is in DevOps. So whoever's familiar with DevOps, you're doing a lot of dynamic changes, you're moving at the speed of light in your environment, but security is, you want security to be there, and sometimes it's difficult to get the security folks involved and have them keep pace with what the developers are doing. With Inspector, you can have the security people go ahead and put their rule sets into the system, and then say, okay, this is what I expect from your applications every time you roll something out. I need to go through these security checks. Security guy does his work, then you can roll it into inspector, and now the developers can continue rolling out stuff and have it constantly evaluated by inspector. So now security can be real time in your development and rollout process. It no longer has to be an afterthought. And nobody likes to talk to the security guy because he tells you to go reverse everything that you did until he can double check it, and that takes like months at a time, right? Compliance. I like security. Compliance is really boring to me, but we're going to talk a little bit about it because we have to. We've got pretty much every regulatory compliance or audit or attestation known to man. I was really impressed when I came to Amazon because I came from a security company. I worked with a lot of people from the intelligence community doing threat intelligence in the environment, a lot of NSA people. And when I came to Amazon and I was able to actually peek behind the curtain and look at all the security aspects of it, it's pretty intense. I mean, it's a world-class security team. I'm on all the lists on every one of these that gets updated. When PCI 3.1 came out, we had that passed in a matter of weeks. I mean, it was really quick. It's just another view of it as well. So you can go to Amazon's website and request a lot of these attestations and reports for yourself. Marshall, you were talking about how you couldn't use Amazon because you couldn't visit the data center, right? All these attestations and these audits and these reports that are by a third-party auditing firm will tell you that they've already visited there and the data center, and they've seen the security controls that are in place, and they're attesting to that in their report. Doesn't change the fact that some people still want to go to the data center, right? All your SOCs are up there. All the technical people and business people, if you have trouble sleeping at night, read this white paper. It took me about a week to read it. It's every one of these sort of attestations and audits that we've gone through, there's a whole matrix in there, and it'll tell you the part that Amazon's responsible for, and it'll tell you the part that the customer's responsible for. It's a really good read if you have any of these needs, whether it be PCI or HIPAA, or you need to do SOC, or hopefully you don't have to do FedRAMP. So PCI is one of the number one workloads that we run, and customers that are running PCI in our environment get the benefit of using Amazon's level 1 service provider attestation that we have, okay? And we got that 3.1 certification in April. With the PCI, we have a package, so you can request this, and you get it really quickly. I tested it out a bunch of times periodically for customers. You go to the website, you fill out a form, and they will email you a link to download our PCI package. It's going to give you our AOC, which is our attestation of compliance. It'll give you our responsibility summary for PCI. It'll also explain to the auditor the shared responsibility that Amazon has. And what it's going to tell the auditor is, hey, all that stuff below the line that I showed you in the other infograph, this is Amazon's responsibility. This is everything that we're certified on. Everything above it is what the customer is responsible for. It's very detailed. Auditors love it. You can get more information at amazon.com/compliance. Here's our conclusion. So security is critical. We're constantly creating tools to make it easier to do security, to do governance, to do compliance. We have a world-class security team. Those guys are great. A lot of them are from some of the 3-letter agencies that make it up. And a lot of the capabilities that we actually do in our own development, our engineering teams from a security standpoint, we're rolling out those tools and those features to our customers. As Colin was saying, the business philosophy at Amazon is an open business philosophy, which means they rely on customer feedback. So they're going to constantly listen to customers and what they want, and they're going to roll stuff out, and they're going to iterate on it at a very fast pace. So from a security and compliance standpoint, hopefully through this speed dating deck that I just showed you, there's a lot of capabilities on being secure, achieving regulatory compliance, and then applying governance into your environment when you operate in the Amazon cloud. So the question was, how do you eliminate the human factor, right?
Insecurity problems.
Insecurity problems. So things like Inspector, the CloudTrail, the config, you can actually go and set your baseline for your environment, and you have it constantly run on that type of environment. And then from then on, it's just locking down your environment and making sure that whoever has access to it has least privileges. Still needs humans for a lot of things, but the goal for security is if you can, in your development process, roll these features and functions that we have in there, you can embed security into the entire development process. So we have a capability called CloudFormation, which I didn't talk about because that's a whole other session by itself, but you can blueprint your entire environment. like you say, a golden image from a virtual machine or whatnot, you can do that for your entire infrastructure environment. You can save that out. So now if you want to go and deploy it, tear it down, or make sure it's all secure, you make that standard once and you can automate the delivery of that. So now you don't have humans deploying EC2 instances, configuring EBS volumes, doing all this manual configurations where there could be security problems. And in combination with the cloud formation is when you can do the inspector, you can do the config and make sure that it stays in compliance. And compliance doesn't have to be regulatory, right? It could be, this is the state and the posture that we want our environment to always be in, and we need to make sure it complies with that rule. What type of data privacy requirements are we seeing most?
Safe harbor, et cetera.
I was about to mention that. It's mainly coming from our EU customers, right? So just recently here in October, I don't know if you guys noticed, but they rendered the safe harbor legislation between the EU and the US invalidated. However, from an EU standpoint, we still have the data privacy that has been approved by the Article 29 Working Party. So that right there guarantees that the data will stay in the EU, and customers are allowed to choose where they store their data. So it's not going to go back to the US. But our main customer requests are coming from the EU side. It's not necessarily on the US side.
Right.
Question was more information on the WAF. So as I was explaining, some of your traditional vendors in the WAFs could be a choke point in the cloud, so you don't get to take the benefit of the elastic scaling. So Amazon came out with their own horizontally scalable WAF, which integrates with CloudFront. So that's going to be the components that it's integrated directly with. So if you're hosting websites on CloudFront, and you don't even have to host it on CloudFront, you can use the WAF to protect your website. It's all API driven. You can dynamically create your rule sets in real time based on threat feeds that you get. We'll have partners that you can subscribe to in the marketplace that have their own sort of threat intelligence that they can dynamically create blacklists for you if you want.
A question about security groups, actually. Right. The rumors were, in times past, that the marginal cost performance-wise of having lots of security groups, that could grow to become non-negligible. What is the current state of things?
The more security groups that you do have, it will decrease performance. However, they're remediating that. We're actually launching an increased security group limit here pretty soon. And that's actually to help out with EC2 Classic to EC2 VPC migrations, which I own that project, luckily. I am being sarcastic. So if you want to hold deck on EC2 Classic to VPC migrations, I can do that as well. But they are increasing that. You have a problem when you get into trying to run all that stuff on the hypervisor because the firewalls are built into the hypervisor module themselves. If anybody's familiar with VMware and NSX, it's a very similar concept. You have the firewall engine built into the hypervisor module, and all your rules are built into that as well. So if you have multiple customers that are running on that Zen hypervisor host that we have, it could decrease performance.
Is that easily quantifiable? Like,
they just
50 security groups, or?
No, there's no formula for it. That's why they have the soft limit at 100. But it's just a soft limit. I mean, you can increase it if you need to.
Does it tend to be more of a latency burden or a throughput burden?
It's going to be more of a performance issue on the actual host itself, trying to do all the computation.